The purpose of my study was to identify what thesauri are used and why at collections of digitized medieval manuscripts. The way that I gathered my data was I sent out a survey to identify organizations. I only got back 4 respondents, which, obviously the results are skewed a little and need to be more developed so that we can have some statistically meaningful results. But what we found was that the mainly implemented thesauri include some of the industry standards and are in line with results of previous studies about thesauri selection and implementation at cultural heritage institutions with digital objects. Namely, Library of Congress standards, the LCSH, the source of graphic materials, the authority file, things like that. Also popular was the Getty AAT Art and Architecture Thesaurus. And those are applied not just in their traditional types of uses, they were also applied in different ways, which was interesting because we got to see name authority file, AAT, and TGM being used for title information. It's also being TGM also being used for subject data, so it's kind of the applications don't necessarily match up with their original intent, but that just shows that these things, once they're developed, can serve many purposes. Just like LCSH is supposed to be a subject heading list, it's so developed and has such a well-defined hierarchy that it is a de facto thesaurus, a de facto controlled vocabulary. One of the interesting results that was identified was the implementation of internally developed thesauri. One of the options in the survey was, did you use any of these thesauri or did you use another one? Please explain. And several of the institutions identified that they developed internal thesauri for their uses, which, identifies that there's gaps, and especially in such a narrowly defined discipline, digitized medieval manuscripts, it's not surprising that there would be gaps in available resources. But what was very interesting about that was the fact that internal thesauri were used for provenance data more than any other thesaurus that was available, indicating that provenential data, who owns it, where did it come from, when was it traded, is not readily available in existing thesauri, or if it is, it's not being used for one reason or another by these institutions. So, it's interesting to see just within such a small sample group that I was able to get some good results in terms of what they were being used. But the supplement to that is why they're being used. And those the responses kind of came with what was to be expected. People said our developer of our database selected it. It is embedded in our content management software. It matches the metadata type that we use, which I believe by saying it matched the metadata type that they were implying that they used some sort of Library of Congress metadata scheme, like MARC or MET or MODS, and that they were just relying on Library of Congress standards since they were using Library of Congress metadata scheme. So they also were looking to things, interoperability, whether or not their terms that they were using for their bibliographic description could be used by other collections or make sense from other collection perspectives. But one of the when it came to developing internal thesauri, any of the institutions that developed internal thesauri said they did so because what they needed wasn't available. So, obviously, I'd like a larger sample group because we only had 4 respondents, and they're a little bit swayed because they're a little bit skewed because it was 2 university collections and 2 public libraries, the New York Public Library and the Free Library of Philadelphia, which NYPL and FLP both have digital collections of medieval manuscripts. So that was an interesting, and I wanted to include them in the sample because I wanted them to supplement the data and not just have like homogeneous sampling of university libraries. But they wound up being half the same group. But I think with more data, we'll be able to get some better results. Maybe with a little bit more massaging of the data, I'll be able to define my terms in a better way so that this data can then be used by institutions that are looking to select Thesauri and use this as evidence of, what's being done, what are the existing gaps, and what would be our best decision in terms of selecting Thesauri for digital